Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to do another memory overclock video. So as you can clearly see, this memory has passed 400% on mem test. It's also passed 10 loops of Intel burn test at 8 gigs of memory usage. So, you know, I'd consider this a very stable system right here. In terms of the hardware that I'm running, let's just get this out of the way. So here's the setup. It is on the stock cooler, which is also why IBT got so very, very hot, right? Because this is just using Precision Boost Overdrive, but you can see that, yeah, it hits 85 degrees. But that's the thing, you can Precision Boost Overdrive on the stock air cooler, it's fine. Because the system, like, it won't let the CPU overheat. Anyway, grabbed the wrong window. Yeah, so that's 3700X on stock cooler. I do have a suspicion that I've managed to degrade the CPU a little bit, but just like a little bit. It seems to be a bit worse than it used to be, but yeah, that's what I get for running it at relatively high static voltages. Anyway, the kit itself is a G.skill Trident Z RGB 3466C16 memory kit. So this stuff right here, right? It's very RGB, as you can see, just 16 gigs, because, well, 32 gig kits are pretty expensive. Yeah, like, this is the first G.skill kit to end up in a, well, yeah, actually, I think this is, like, the first G.skill kit that I've done a video about, which, basically comes down to the fact that in the UK, G.skill tends to be kind of hard to find, pretty expensive when you do find it, and that's kind of it, really. It's just like, it's hard to test memory that, you know, it's just like, I don't really want to pay for this. Anyway, yeah, where was I going with this? So that's the memory kit that we're running here. The motherboard is the ASUS X570i Strix, so that's the ITX ROG board, which I do have it modified in, like, basically I have extended voltage ranges, but that's not relevant for the purposes of this video. We're not running, like, I'm not actually using any of the modifications. There's an argument to be made that my board now has better capacitors than what it would normally come with, but considering my soldering skills, I don't think that counts. Like, for the most part, the memory, like, the capacitor swap I've done is like, well, it's mostly because the original capacitors were only good to 2 volts, whereas I needed something a little bit better because obviously I have the extended voltage ranges. Again, not relevant to what we're doing here. Anyway, so yeah, it passed 400% mem test. It passes, you know, 8 gigs of IBT, so I'd consider this a very, very stable setup. In terms of settings, we're looking at 3733 at 16, 19, 19, 35. We'll look at the timings and the actual, like, frequency and everything once we get into the BIOS. So yeah, very stable. You know, even with the stock air cooler, though admittedly, like, this is on an open air test bench, which is generally better for memory temperatures than, you know, in-case setups. Even though the memory does tend to, like, the memory does live in front of the CPU, so it normally gets the freshest air, assuming you have front intake. But the thing is, well, it's not like I did a test where I intentionally had the GPU cook the memory, right? Because that's always a concern in gaming builds, is just like, if you start getting memory errors after like an hour of gameplay, it's probably because the internals of your case are too hot. And that's why, like, side panels are bad for thermals. Anyway, because they just trap the air. So it's kind of that with the stability test. So we're going to do a few little benchmarks. IDA is actually terrible for gauging overall performance. It's very easy to run, and, you know, I like, who doesn't like, I like IDA numbers. I like the numbers IDA spits out. They're just not very accurate a lot of the time, because there's a lot of workloads that, you know, I've run where it's just like, well, IDA would indicate that the performance is fine, and then you run something like, say, HWBot H265, and you find out it's in fact not fine because there's a subtiming problem that IDA doesn't really care about, but a lot of other benchmarks do. Like, some benchmarks care a lot. So, yeah, anyway, so we're getting 65.5 nanoseconds latency, which is pretty nice, right? Like, for something that isn't BDI, that's good. So, you know, we can roll with that. The memory bandwidth, I'm actually not sure what kind of memory bandwidth this should get. Also, I'm not running like super ridiculously aggressive timings or like any insane voltages. This is a very mild overclock in my opinion. So yeah, we're getting about 53.6 gigs read, and oh right, there's no point running the write test. We're on a single CCD CPU. Yeah, there's no point running this because a single CCD CPU can't actually max out the write bandwidth. So anyway, that's kind of that. Let's just run X265 because we will do a comparison of X265 against stock on this. 3466, like, you know, well, stock XMP. 3466 as an XMP profile is kind of interesting because it might in a lot of circumstances, it could actually be faster than some of the really cheap 3600 CL18 kits we're seeing, just because you're not that far behind on the frequency, but you have significantly better timings with, you know, this being 3466, 16, 18, 18. Like, that's just kind of going to obliterate something like a 3600, 18, 22, 22 when it comes to memory latency. There's just one issue. This kit costs significantly more than a lot of the 3600 CL18 kits out there. And in fact, it costs more than even like 3600 CL16 kits. And at that point, it's just like, I'm really like, well, yeah. Like, so I'm kind of like, I'm relative, like, it's a nice set of CJR. But the overall, like, but it's CJR, right? Like, that's the whole issue. And so I'm just gonna bring up the current prices for this kit. So this kit is this kit right here, right, for $118. Now I'm in the UK, so here it's like 110 quid is what I paid for it. But still, most of you guys are probably from the US, so I'm, you know, using just US PC part picker. Anyway, so this is the kit, right? I think. Let's just check that. Yeah. So that's the correct part number right there. Yes, it is. And the obvious issue with this is, well, it's $118, right? So if we go a little bit up in prices, we can get Team Group's T-Force Extreme 6 kit over here, which is 3733 CL18. I am like back when these sticks released, they were always B-die. They're probably still always B-die. So, you know, you can get Samsung B-die in that, but there's other options like these Patriot Viper 4 blackouts at 4000 megahertz CL19. As far as I know, that's a B-die bin. So, you know, it's like, so spending $118 on CJR when for a little bit more you can get B-die is like not the best idea in my opinion. Actually, if we include a few more expensive kits, like I'm pretty sure at like $130 we can get a proper B-die bin. In fact, yeah, even from G.skill you can get a 3200 CL14 B-die bin for $135, which is what, $17 more, right? Which admittedly that's a pretty decent price hike, but yeah. I'm like, I think and then, oh yeah, Patriot has their 4000 1919. So the other one is 192121, which most of the time will be B-die, but not necessarily always. But 191919 is always B-die, and that's $130 right now. So that's only like $12 more than this kit right here. And you can go from CJR straight to B-die. So, but, you know, like, that's still not, you know, that's like still a 10% price increase on the memory kit. But I'd argue it's like after you have a good enough heatsink, right? Like, and you have because the thing is like, if you have like a nice GPU, a nice heatsink for your CPU, a nice motherboard, then one of the places, in my opinion, where it makes sense to splurge if you care about performance is just like dump it into a better memory kit, because for $10 more, you can go from CJR or Revy or whatever to B-die, right? But anyway, if we scroll down, it gets worse because okay, we can't see them right now, but for around $100, well, actually less than $100, you have Crucial's new 3600 CL16 RGB, like some of the other kits that in my opinion are more cost effective than this kit, they're not RGB. So for a lot of people that's like, well, this is not RGB and I want RGB, and RGB obviously raises the price of memory for no, like it doesn't make it any faster, but it sure as hell costs more. But yeah, so these are RGB and they're 3600 CL16. And so they're just, and it is crucial, so it's Rev E, and if you tighten up Rev E, it doesn't tighten quite as much as CJR does, so it's not, like, your latency is going to be slightly worse than this, but this is significantly, like, you know, this is like 20 bucks cheaper. And the best part is, if you're willing to overclock, you can get Rev E for much, much less. Also, Patriot has a 3600 CL17 bin of CJR right here, which actually that's probably a weaker CJR bin than what we have here. So that might not overclock quite as well. Like for all, like that might not do CL16 at 3733. But, you know, Crucial also has their RGB ballistics in a 3200 CL16 bin, and this is still going to be Rev E, and yeah, it's like $90 instead of almost 120. And at that point, it's just like, this kit's just not cost effective at all, in my opinion. Like, unfortunately, and there's a lot of memory kits out there where it's just like the price for this, well, in general, RAM prices just don't make a lot of sense if you look at them sort of like, what IC is it? And how versus how much does it cost? Because if you ignore, because basically things that cause memory to cost more in terms of asking price, not like price you should actually buy for, but like what the vendor wants to sell it to you for, it's like having RGB, higher call, like they, you know, higher price. Having a either coming with a tightly timed XMP profile or a high frequency XMP profile, gonna cost more. And so the issue is you just end up with a lot of kits where it's just like, but this is just a different bin of CJR that has a price that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, this is not, in my opinion, the worst offender. Like, there's some, like, G.skill has some, I think, 4,000 megahertz, well, yeah, G.skill has lovely things like this stuff right here, right? Like, I'm complaining about this not being cost effective because it's almost $120 for CJR, but like 18, 22, 22, 42 at 3600 megahertz for 130. Like, that's a ripoff. Like, that's a complete and utter ripoff. If you buy this, like, you've been screwed over. Like, that's just, like, that's it. Like, you're paying more for worse memory. And there's tons and tons of kits like that, where if we just raise the price a bit more, right? Like, oh, look, we have a 3600 CL17 at $160. Like, that's offensive to me. Like, that is just straight up not okay. Is that, oh, wait, that might be 17, 18, 18. If it's 17, 18, okay, that's B-die. That's still a totally unacceptable price for a, like, no, it's still offensive. Like, it's B-die, but it's not, like, a great bin of B-die, and it's 160 bucks, which is just like, nope. So, yeah. And then, okay, so we have something like a 4133 CL18, which that's actually aggressive and decent. What else do we have? 386618. Depending on the TRCD, this might be okay or not okay. 18, 19, 19. Okay, I'd tolerate that. There's some kits where I remember seeing some like 4,000 megahertz kits that were very, very loose on the timings, and I was thinking like, who the hell buys this? And I'm trying to find them, and I might have not raised the price enough. So, let's see. Okay, you know what? Let's just sort it by memory speed. So, $200, like, for a 4500 bin, like, okay, I'll tolerate that. 40. These are still cheap. These are great. I love I love the Viper Steels. Like, for what they are, that is a really, really nice price. Anyway. Oh yeah, this right here. 18222242 at 4000 megahertz. I wonder what memory chip that could possibly be. Like, yeah, so basically the memory vendors, like, the prices don't reflect the performance capabilities and the overclocking capabilities of the memory chips that are being used. They reflect the frequency, like the spec frequency. Which basically means there's a lot of specs where it's just like, this is not cost effective, and you just kind of probably shouldn't buy it. And I'd say this kit very much falls into that category where it's just like, it's not even that great. So anyway, I'm just going to need to figure out, yeah. So, you know, yeah, so we're getting 15.857 FPS here in H.265. IDA was, so I'm just going to write that down. I don't actually expect this to see that big a drop. 15.857 when we set it back to XMP. Though, actually, we'll see. We'll see. I wanted to also do, like, IBT is actually pretty good about memory bandwidth as well. So we're just going to do a quick, like, three runs at high. So we're not going to run Cinebench because Cinebench doesn't care about memory performance on Ryzen, like, at all. It just doesn't make a difference. Or, well, no, it does make a difference, but the difference it makes is so small that it's basically margin of error for Cinebench, so you'd need to run it, like, over and over and over and over again before you're able to prove that your new memory settings are actually faster than your old ones for Cinebench. Which, especially if you're also dealing with Precision Boost Overdrive on a stock air cooler, this is just not a good idea. So, yeah. Okay, so we get 99.7 gigaflops. I could have used a smaller memory size. Like, I could have punched in like 1500 megabytes if I wanted it to spit out results a bit faster. Yeah, so at this point, I've probably completely turned you off on this memory kit, so I don't know why anybody's still watching. Except if you want to see some like, if you want to see timings for other CJR kits. Because, like, I'm happy with this kit from the perspective of, like, oh, I now have another kit of CJR to sort of test and, you know, experience in my collection. But, because I have a different kit, like, I have a 3866CL18 CJR kit as well. But, so for me, it's more like, oh, I have another kit that I can compare with. But as a, like, if I was buying a memory kit for a system I'm building, like, I would not buy this. It's just, like, if this was $90 or, like, $95, you know, $100, then I'd say, okay, that's a good deal for a kit like this. Yeah, so we're getting, like, the thing is, it drops off in performance as the CPU hits up. So 97 to 99. I mean 99.7 to 99. And now let's go into the BIOS. Like, I'll happily defend crazy high frequency B-die bins because at least they're B-die. But something like a 5 gigahertz Rev E, where it's like well, okay, well, like, the really super high ridiculous frequency Rev E bins, like, the problem I have with those is, like, they're cool on paper if you're, like, an extreme overclocker. But they are not what I would consider, like, memory I would actually want to pay for if I'm building a gaming system or anything like that I actually intend to use every day. Because, yeah, like, you know what else did 5 gigahertz really easy? The FX 9590. It just wasn't very fast. And that's kind of the same situation with a lot of the, like, really ridiculous XMP memory kits out there, where it's just like, yeah, it does 5 gigahertz, but it's also Rev E, so the subtimings are just never going to be as good as a halfway decent kit of B-die, and at that point, it's just like, well, why are you bothering? So anyway, and I just realized that I forgot to, well, we can do that when we run XMP, so let's just go over the settings. So voltages, you know, we're just 1.1 volts SoC, 1.38 volts on the memory. CJR really doesn't scale with voltage that much. In fact, this was almost passing memtest at 1.35. It was almost doing it. And at 1.4, it was actually spitting out more errors. So I ended up, well, actually, it wasn't really, Well, at 1.4, I was having like, I had one pass that was really good, except for like one error. And then when I kept playing around with it, it looked like there was some kind of weird, like the motherboard wasn't configuring something correctly. So I tried backing off the voltage a bit, and then I just ended up staying at 1.38 because I was just like, well, I'm not tightening up the timings any further. I can't be bothered. You might be able to maybe squeeze out like another fraction at, well, maybe 65 nanoseconds instead of 65.5 should be possible. Maybe high 64 point something. If you maybe got it running at like 3800 megahertz instead of just the 3733 I settled for. CCD voltage is at 1, VDDG CCD is at 1 volt, IO die is at 1.05. For the VRM settings, I have the current limit for the CPU just maxed out. You know, well, don't want the VRM current, like any kind of current limit kicking in. SoC load line calibration is also maxed out. SoC switching frequency is maxed out. This is mostly just to stabilize the FCLK, which is, we know it's relatively stable because it passes IBT no problem. So yeah, maxed out SoC switching frequency and forced full phase mode on the SoC VRM as well. So basically having this in extreme mode means that the SoC phases are both always running. There's a two-phase SoC VRM. Normally at idle you might want to turn off one of the phases, but if you just want best voltage regulation performance and don't care too much about efficiency, it's not like a huge difference in terms of VRM efficiency. Then yeah, you want to put it into extreme mode, because in extreme mode, you're like, it's just never going to turn any of the phases off, and that can lead to slightly better transient response going from idle to load. So anyway, yeah, so that's the VRM settings, and then that's the voltages. CPU's on auto because we're just running PBO, right? Which the PBO settings are just 300, 230, 230 with 4x boost, 4x scalar. Though honestly, this CPU doesn't care if I set the scalar to 1x or 4x or 2x or 3x. Like, the scalar doesn't do anything. I don't really, well, yeah, it's just like, yeah, it doesn't do anything. So I could have had it set to 3 or 2 or whatever. It doesn't really seem to matter. Anyway, DRAM timing control, 16. So for the primaries, 16, 19, 19, 19, 35, with 54 TRC. So this is one of the, like, the TRC is actually one of the places where CJR just beats out Rev E. Is you can run low TRC. On Rev E, it's really hard to go below 60 TRC, and TRC is a relatively important timing for your overall performance. So on Rev E, when you're stuck at like 63 TRC, well, that's part of the reason why CJR general, like, why I prefer CJR to Rev E, because it's just like at 37, like Rev E can clock much higher than CJR can. But with CJR, you can do slightly tighter timings within the frequency range that, you know, is acceptable for the Infinity Fabric, which here we're running 1866 megahertz. So, Infinity Fabric. So, CJR has a bit of an advantage. Anyway, so that's a 54, then 4, 6, 16 for the TRRDs. Like, the funny thing is, I've had a lot of people tell me, or at least I remember a couple people saying that CJR doesn't do low TRRDs, but like this right here works. Like, it passes mem test, it doesn't have any errors, it passes IBT, it runs everything I want it to run. So yeah, it does just fine on low TRRDs, so no problems there. WTRS and L is just at 412. These actually, like, it won't run 4.8, and I didn't test 410 because I couldn't be bothered, but 412 works. So, you know, that's that. TWR12, SCLs of 4.4, TRFC of 500, which is a slight bit better than what you'd get on Rev E. 470 TRFC straight up doesn't work. So, yeah, that's how I ended up at 500, because also at like 480-ish, I'd be getting some errors here and there. But the thing is, whenever I'd be getting errors, I'd try to change like a bunch of timings at the same time that I thought were maybe a bit too low. So it's really hard for me to say if like this is specifically what fixed the timing errors, because it's like, well, I changed like 3 things by admittedly very small increments for each of them. And then the errors went away. So these timings work. So basically, don't try to copy paste my timings. It's more like use them as a guideline. Something like this should be possible. Doesn't mean it has to be possible. Because again, the silicon lottery means that, you know, different kits will end up with different results. I left TCWL on auto because, well, I don't expect it to go below 16. It might be worth trying 14, but honestly, like, 16 is fine, and going down to 14 probably won't change the performance that much, so I just left it on auto. RTP, I actually forgot about that one, but normal, like, that one doesn't generally go that low either at low voltages, so yeah, I probably wouldn't be running, like, I probably wouldn't set that lower than 10 or 12 anyway, so I'm fine with leaving that auto. Go down here. One thing I did have to change is actually all of the drive strengths. I set them to 30 ohms because before I set them to 30 ohms, I was getting errors. So, which is kind of interesting because with BDI most of the time, like, well, with other kits, my experience has been like I'd need to run lower drive strengths, as in, actually, it would be as a drive strength, because if I'm not mistaken, this is like a resistor that goes from, actually, you know what, no, but basically, yeah, with other kits, you know, 24 or 20 tends to work better, but for whatever reason, this kit likes 30 for every single one of these. So these are kind of settings where it's just like, yeah, just kind of mess around, like try them out and see if the errors go away. And at 30, 30, 30, 30, the errors went away. So what else is there? And then everything else is just auto, except gear down mode I have enabled because gear down mode is a great convenient stability booster. And I'm like, the thing is, you do lose a little bit of performance to it, but at the same time, it's just like, well, I'm too lazy to try fight the system into running without gear down mode. So it's just like, nah, I'm just going to run with gear down mode. Because the performance difference between with GDM and no GDM is really small. So I just don't care. Power down disabled as well. That's the one other thing that you want to disable is power down. Which, if I'm not mistaken, that's supposed to fix like blue screens on exiting sleep. But if you don't have your computer go to sleep, then actually power down doesn't really do anything as far as I know. Anyway, so that's kind of the settings. I actually like proc ODT is just straight up set to auto because, well, the board is doing a perfectly good job of setting it itself. Though potentially if you have situations where it's like after like you reboot and it's stable and then you reboot again and then it's unstable, it might make sense to set more timing, like set more things manually to just make absolutely certain that like the motherboard isn't screwing something up during memory training. Because that's kind of the thing. If you have like you boot once and it's stable and then you boot again and it's not stable, it means the motherboard changed something that was set to auto and it changed it wrong. And basically you want to force the motherboard to use the correct value for it. So in that scenario, you might want to lock in something like proc ODT or some timings where it's maybe the board just randomly decided to do something stupid to TCWL, but I've just not encountered that yet. So, you know, that's why a lot of things here are set to auto. Anyway, so that's kind of the, yeah, that's it for the settings actually, because, you know, it's just a PBO overclock and then a little bit more voltage on the memory, a little bit less on the CCD, a little bit more on the I/O die. Well, relatively low CCD voltage, slightly higher I/O die voltage. Actually, it might work fine if I had both of them at the same level. It's just that this is something that at least on Threadripper is extremely well. With mainstream Ryzen, I've not really noticed it caring too much about VDDG settings. But on Threadripper, VDDG makes a huge difference, but you can't set the CCD voltage too high. And most of the Infinity Fabric clock stability scaling is just entirely the I/O die voltage. So I've basically taken that from Threadripper and just use it on mainstream as well, and it seems to be working just fine. Right? Like, the thing is, it's really hard to... Like it's pretty, because Infinity Fabric instability is not super consistent, and it's kind of awkward to detect, so it's really hard to prove that this actually matters, but it works, so I'm willing to run with it. So, like, it's not hurting anything at the very least. So, Yeah, but this probably, like, this might not be necessary. You might be just fine setting both of them to 1.05 instead of having one of them at 1.0 and the other one at 1.05. Anyway, so, yeah, that's my settings. Now let's bring it back down to XMP. So, actually, we need to set it back down to 3466. Bring this all the way back to auto. There we go. We're going to go to DRAM timing control. We don't need to fix the... like, we don't need to adjust the VRM settings, because there's just no reason to bother with that. Well, nah, we can set these back down to auto, it'll be fine. Like, auto's 3466, so it's not going to have stability issues. Auto. And, well, actually, I think the board sets 1.35 volts when you enable XMP. Like, this is one of the, like, on ASUS motherboards, when you enable XMP, it, like, actually makes the BIOS adjustments, whereas on other motherboards, if you leave everything on auto, it still applies the XMP settings, which is something I'm, like, tend to forget. Actually, I think I screwed up the timings. Yeah, this is not going to work, so we need to actually set the... You know what? There's an easier way to do this. And the easier way to do this is to go load optimize defaults. Yes. Then go back to the AI tweaker. And then go DOCP. Yeah, whatever. But this is a 3466 kit, so the FCLK desynchronization is not a concern. Then we go to Precision Boost Overdrive, because we do need to run the same PBO settings, otherwise the performance results will be incorrect. And manual, and 4x, even though I don't expect it to do anything. And yeah, so that's the thing, is like the board does actually set all the timings. And you can see that the XMP profile, like this is something worth noting, is most XMP profiles literally just set the primary timings and don't set anything else. So yeah, there are some memory kits out there which will set some of your secondaries, but generally it doesn't touch it. Like most XMP profiles won't do that. Also, there was one other thing I wanted to... Was there? Wait. No, there isn't. Oh, right. This kit does only have one XMP profile. Like, there are kits out there which will have 2 XMP profiles. This one only has 1. So there's just 34, 66, 16, 18, 18. Which I think is, like... I think it would have been neat if there was, like, also a 3200 profile on there. With maybe the same primaries. Like, well, it would have been neat for me, because then it's like, oh, I can also do comparisons against 3200 CL16 XMP settings versus, like, overclocks. But, yeah, because I still, like, the thing is, I really am very much averse to the idea of buying a 3200 CL16 XMP memory kit. It's just like, it's well, except if it was, like, a Crucial one. Because with Crucial, it's going to be Rev E, and Rev E is fine. Because Rev E at 3200 CL16 is going to overclock well. But... if you buy 3200 CL16 from G.skill, Corsair, or Team Group, or any of the vendors that use a lot of different chips, you're kind of going to get whatever the hell turned up on the factory floor that day, and, well, that's no fun, right? Oh, wait. Forgot one thing. There we go. This Windows install was made with, like, some old AMD GPU that doesn't support UEFI, so, you know. Fun fact, if you mod the BIOS on an AMD GPU, that breaks the UEFI functionality as well. So, there is some way to patch it if you do that, but I've just never been bothered to do that. And I run modded BIOSes on a lot of my GPUs, so it's just like, yeah, most of my Windows installs are legacy mode, so that I don't need to worry about them like complaining about GPU BIOS mods. So, now we're back down at... the 3466 settings. I actually have no idea how this is going to perform. Like, I've never actually run it at stock, because the XMP profile is just this unnecessary thing that, you know, indicates, like, they could honestly sell memory by bin grades to me, instead of actually having, like, XMP specs. But, you know, for most people, the XMP is there so that their memory actually runs at a decent speed. Whereas for me, it's just like the XMP is an indicator of, like, a rough indicator of binning quality. So what else is there to talk about? Well, the thing is, like, the next thing I want to talk about, like, we'd need to take the sticks out of the system, which we can't do while the system is running H.265, so, yeah. I won't be testing any RGB software, though I will say, out of, so far, all of the RGB kits that, like, I've messed with, this is probably the most underwhelming RGB implementation I've seen. Then again, like, my criteria is like RGB Corsair Dominators and Team Group's T-Force Extreme ARGB, where it's just like one of them is literally the entire memory stick can change color, which I think is really cool. Or at least the entire side of the memory stick that you can see and care about can change color. And then the other one, well, those, like, the RGB Dominators are so insanely, ridiculously bright. Like, I honestly think they look horrendous, but the saturation on those, like, on the RGB on the Dominators is awesome. But they just, I just wish they had implemented it differently, because the sticks are ugly. These, you know, these I find I'm very neutral to these. Because the RGB's not, like, it's a bit washed out, in my opinion. Compared to some of the other kits, but at the same time, it's just like, well, it's also not, like, it doesn't feel like it's trying very hard either, right? Because it's literally just a little bit of plastic on top of the stick, so it kind of feels like an afterthought to me, which I'd say is true of most RGB implementations, because most RGB implementations is you take something that originally was meant to be, like, nice, like, well, you take whatever hardware you designed, you make it monochrome, and then you whack a couple LEDs somewhere, and then you can say it's RGB, and it's just like, yeah, so there's some weird little strip somewhere on the product that lights up. Like, I'm sorry, like, I really prefer the days when we had actual, like, color on hardware instead of, like, one random spot that glows, you know, RGB. So, and I feel like these memory sticks, unfortunately, fall very much into the category of hardware where some random part of it just lights up for no apparent reason. Because it's like, if the entire stick can change color, that's cool, because it's like, maybe I want red memory sticks, maybe I want blue memory sticks. Well, now I don't have to choose, I can just make the memory stick red or blue. But when it's a little strip of LEDs some random place, then it's just like, but that's, like, the stick is gray, and there's a red highlight. That's not the same as having a red stick, right? Anyway, so we get 15.42. Yeah, that's a very minor performance drop, isn't it? But it's the thing. Memory doesn't make that much of a difference. Well, depends on the workload, but generally memory just doesn't make that big performance differences. Actually, before we run IVT, let's run something relatable and fast, like IDA. I'm going to do latency first. Did I hit start or not? Oh, I guess I did hit start. Okay, I screwed up the test. If you move the mouse, it can affect the score. So we're going to have to rerun it. Good job, BuildZoid, you idiot. So, one thing worth noting about, like, the 3466 CL16 is this on paper should probably be better than, like, a 3600 CL18. At the same time, this also costs more than most, like, 3600. Like, 3600 CL18 is now, like, a pretty cheap memory bin. So it's just like, sure, it might be slightly faster than a 3618. It's also much more expensive. So that doesn't really do anything, in my opinion. You know, it's just like, unfortunately, that doesn't count. So memory latency's gone way up, which makes sense because, you know, like, all of the timings are worse. The FCLK is worse. Everything is worse. But there's good overclocking headroom in the kit. So yeah, we're getting like 17 nanoseconds now. Which, honestly, like, I think, like, the crucial ballistics, the 3600, 16, 18, 18, I think those should hit, like, 69 at stock. Or, like, they should hit a little bit better just because they have a FCLK advantage, and they still have the same primary timings, right, of 16, 18, 18, 35, 38. Anyway, let's do memory read, which previously this was 53.6 gigs. Now I'm going to guess 49. I need to stop testing memory. Oh man, I have a problem. Like, I need to stop testing memory. I didn't run this before. In fact, 3466 CL16 is like not a memory configuration I've ever run, but I nailed it. Yeah, so evidently I've been running way too much IDA and way too many, like, there was a earlier attempt at shooting this video where I was going through the entire overclock. Well, I did an attempt, like I attempted to do a video where I go through the overclocking process for these memory sticks, but I didn't like how that video turned out. But in that video, I predicted what latency I was gonna get with like the subtimings I set, and I was like spot on. And at that point I was just like, I need to stop. Like when you don't even need to run the benchmark to know what score it's gonna spit out, you've been messing with the memory, like you've been doing too much memory overclocking, because like the only way you're able to do that is if you run the test so many times that you know how it's supposed to score for like multiple combinations of settings. No, we are not running it at very high, just high, because if you set it to very high, it's gonna run like twice as long per iteration. So yeah, you know, 5 nanoseconds higher latency at XMP, 4 point, what is it? Like 4.9 gigs less bandwidth. No, 4.6. Yeah, 4.6 gigs less bandwidth. So it's a nice set of CJR. It's just like I wish it wasn't so expensive. That's the main issue. Oh man, we actually see a pretty big drop in performance for IBT. So this is why I like IBT for memory testing, because it actually like sucks up memory bandwidth. Like it's actually really good about sucking up a bunch of memory bandwidth. So that's 98.8 instead of like we dropped an entire gigaflop basically for the first iteration. So like the thing is the last pass previously was 99 gigaflops, but it drops as the temperature of the CPU goes up. So now we're getting 98.5. So I think honestly we've lost like an entire gigaflop. Also, even when the CPU, like even if you're running a static CPU clock, the score, you know, floats around a little bit. So though with boost, that's obviously just worse because you have boost messing with it. Well, that's the thing. Like at the end of the day, though, it's still like 1%. You know, 1 gigaflop at 99 gigaflops, that's like 1%. It's, well, a little bit more than 1%, right? So, and then we get 98.4. So we lost anywhere from like 1 to 0.6 gigaflops, which is just like, yeah, that's like a 1% performance change. Not really a big deal. There, though, the thing is just like, well, I don't do game benchmarks, but, you know, if, well, Hardware Unboxed did a really excellent video showing performance changes in, like, specifically in games with tuned subtimings. So, yeah, if you want something that actually shows some impressive gains from memory, then check that video out, because honestly, like, a lot of the, like, there are some workloads that are like super, well, there's some really synthetic workloads that I could run that make that see big differences in memory, but I just don't really want to use those. So anyway, the other thing we want to do is we're going to use Typhoon Burner, and we're going to check the SPD. So Typhoon Burner is a free tool, or like there's a free trial, like there's a free trial version of it that you can get. That's, I don't think it expires. Which allows you to check, basically read the SPD profile of your memory, and from that you can tell the part number, so it says CJR. There's one other way to tell if a memory stick from G.skill is CJR, and or, well, one other way to get an idea of what memory chip your G.skill memory might have, that I will show you shortly. Because sometimes what you'll get is like there's no actual requirement for the SPD profiles on memory sticks to be configured correctly. So the fact that the memory stick actually reports that it's CJR correctly, that's not required, right? Like the part that I have highlighted here, like there's no requirement whatsoever in for that to be accurate. So especially in like the DDR3 era, there are a lot of memory sticks which don't specify a part number at all. There's just nothing there. So on DDR4, what you're more likely to encounter is that the part number is wrong, not that it's not there. So you'll have like a CJR kit saying that, oh, I'm AFR, and then when you test it, it's like, but it clocks like CJR. Yeah, because it is CJR. The SPD is just wrong because the memory vendor couldn't be bothered with making a new SPD profile for the CJR stick that's using that is compatible with the old AFR SPD, right? Like that's the whole thing. It's just like, well, it's 3200 CL16, and if you don't change anything in terms of the subtype, like they're not gonna, like, the XMP profile is literally just frequency plus primary timings. So there's no reason to write a new SPD if you go from AFR to CJR, except for not confusing people who use Typhoon Burner. Check their CJR stick and see that it's AFR. But this is a 3466CL16, so I don't think they were ever able to bin this like AFR into this. So yeah, it does actually display CJR properly. I was kind of hoping that maybe I'd get lucky and get B-die, because there are some 3466, like I have a 3466CL16 B-die kit from Corsair. But yeah, well, CJR can do this just fine as well, so here we have some CJR. I do plan to also test this on Intel, just because I've not done any CJR on Intel, and now I actually have 4 sticks of CJR, so admittedly they're kind of mismatched, but I can do like a 4x8 test of CJR, so yeah, that's going to be in the future as well. So anyway, we're going to shut this down, and now let's take a look at a little bit more of a look at the actual memory sticks. So the last thing I wanted to talk about with these was, oh, and these do come with a integrated like temperature sensor, which is also not required for all memory sticks to have. There we go. Man, these heat spreaders are really fat. Like that is one thing. Like they fill up the entire DIMM slot. Anyway, so the last thing I wanted to talk about is the PCB on these. And actually, wait, forgot where the camera is. Gonna need some zoom on that. There we go. Yeah, so you can see the memory chips there. So this is a standard A2 layout, right? So the memory chips are right under the sticker here. So that's our standard A2, because you have the great big gap down the center. And there's no surprise that this is A2 because, well, it's an RGB memory stick. Like, there's really nothing else it could be. Also, if you're wondering about this, this is what I got by what got my thumb too close to a soldering iron. That's what happened there. So, yeah. That happened a while ago, so yeah. Anyway, so standard A2 layout, which is what you'd expect for an RGB memory stick. And let's zoom out again. Actually, no, I want to zoom in, and because the other thing I wanted to point out is, yeah, so here in the, I think, well, this number right here, okay, no, you can't see anything. There. Come on, focus. You see that C? The letter C over here? That tells us that this, like, you can get C die, as in Samsung C die, and that'll also have the letter C. But C die is kind of too terrible to do a speed bin like this, so we can tell that this is probably CJR because of the 8825C. That can tell us this is, you know, like, when I first unboxed the kit, I looked at that label, and I was just like, oh, this is probably CJR. Then when I started overclocking, it was like, yeah, it's CJR. So that's one other way to try figure out what your G.skill memory kits have. And it's especially useful if you get something that, you know, it's like it reports its AFR, but it overclocks way too good. Then checking the label can definitely make it a lot easier to figure out if you've actually got like CJR or something. Because There have, like, I have seen people report that, you know, you can get G.skill kits, especially at like 3200 CL16, and some other bins as well will run into it where it's just like, it says it's AFR, but it clocks like CJR. And it's just like, well, that's because it's not AFR, it's because it's CJR. Anyway, so yeah, that's oh, and the last thing about the A2 layout on this is a 10-layer PCB, which we know because, well, G.skill tells us that it's a 10-layer PCB, which is more layers than you would get on, well, the thing is, like, the minimum layer count for a DDR4 memory stick is like 8 layers, or at least I've not heard of any PCB layouts that are less than 8 layers. And I can't find the part where they say it. I'm just not going to show it. Well, oh no. No, I will. There. So, yeah, custom engineered 10-layer PCB. And that's the thing is, like, they can, you know, like, it is basically an A2 layout, which means higher frequency, that kind of thing. It's the latest memory layout available for DDR4, 8-bit wide memory chips. But, which is what most desktop memory sticks use. But again, like, G.skill is capable of, you know, making some adjustments to that PCB layout to try and make it better for overclocking. So I'm actually kind of, well, I've not been having great luck with my other CJR kit on Intel, so I'm kind of interested to see how this compares there. But on Ryzen, where, you know, I've just, because the thing is, I was trying to push, like, actually high frequencies instead of just something like 3733. So on Ryzen, I've not had any problems. But yeah, so, you know, I'm excited to have another set of CJR to play with, but as far as actually buying these goes, I would not really recommend it, at least not at the current prices where, you know, they're like, nope, that's not it. That, like, yeah, at this price, these just don't make sense. Mostly because, like, this exists, which is, like, yay crucial, right? Like, $97 for a 3600 1618, like, especially, like, if you're only going to run the XMP, like, this is crazy awesome, whereas this is just like, well, I have, you know, I just wanted to try a G.skill kit, and I wasn't too fussed about getting something particularly good, so I was just like, well, at least it's not 3200 CL16. So that's how I ended up with these. So yeah, anyway, that's it for the video. So thanks for watching. Thanks to the patrons for, you know, funding the memory kit and the motherboard and the CPU and really everything in the test bench today. So yeah, if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, you can do that through Patreon. There's a link to it down in the description below. There's also the ASUS Teespring store where you know, you can pick up shirts, stickers, posters, the usual YouTuber merch stuff that also, you know, helps out with running the channel. Allows me to basically buy stuff instead of having to, like, beg for review samples, which for some brands is very much the case, and other brands it's kind of like not really. But anyway, what else was there? Oh yeah, like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And that's it for the video, so thanks for watching, and goodbye.